right, I'm Mary Paige Lacey. I'm Alex Tesser.
I'm Chaz Crawford.
And I'm Chase Ackerman, and our topic is government surveillance, and we are now open to questions.
I'll start. Yesterday, with all the impeachment stuff going on, I'm not sure if you all were aware or saw where Congress presented a continuing resolution to extend the Patriot Act. I just wanted to get your opinion on what you thought about it being maybe, I don't know if snuck in is the right word, but it being stuck in with a funding resolution to continue that act.
Well, with the Patriot Act, I feel like it's already been kind of somewhat, it's removed a lot of the things that like was bad about the government surveillance that like the FIFSA did, but I feel like them putting it back in isn't really surprising because I feel like the government is kind of just sneaking all of these things in under our noses, and they're kind of making it so that like they can watch basically everything we do, and that's like constitutional for them, but it's not really constitutional as per the Constitution, and I'm not really surprised that they're doing that. I didn't hear about that, but I'm not surprised that they are doing that.
So I also did not really know about that. Do you know if they mentioned anything about the Freedom Act in that, or?
No, specifically the Patriot Act.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I also feel like because of the time that was like first enacted, it makes sense that it's like coming back. So, like Chase said, I feel like the return of it isn't surprising, but it's interesting to hear about. Yeah.
I think how the public reacts to it will be very interesting, because originally a lot of the public were calling the Patriot Act very unconstitutional, saying that it was like unfairly eavesdropping on all of its citizens. So I'm interested to see how that will go over.
So in your opinion, do you think people will even know unless they're paying attention because it's part of a continuing resolution to fund government versus a surveillance?
I think that those who are kind of aware of what the Patriot Act is and what it does, I think they'll probably be the most against it. But I think for the people that kind of never really took a full time to really look at it or understand it, they might kind of remain a little bit more oblivious to what the topic is. So I think it just depends on who's looking at it.
So as it relates to government surveillance in our lives as private citizens, where do you think the lines should get drawn? Okay, so us as law-abiding citizens versus you're a terrorist suspect, you're also a U.S. citizen. Where do you think, so talk to us a little bit about what are some of the tools and measures that the government can take and use to use surveillance on terrorist suspects, and then where does that line get drawn?
So I actually did a ton of research on this, and so apparently governments, not even the United States, but tons of governments around the world are being in contact with these hacking groups. There's one in Italy called literally Hacking Team, and there's one in Germany called like GERP or something like that. And basically they're teaming up with these groups of people, and they're buying their products, and they're incorporating these products into like security protocol for government surveillance. Like they're literally teaming with these groups of people and using their products. So I think that that's like a really good indicator. And also the Hacking Team one from Italy has been at most of the United States security conference meetings for this year. Like we don't know if they've bought like product from them, but they've been at like almost all of the security conferences, and I even saw that they paid for one of their breakfasts. So I think that there's kind of a hint there that they might be in tangent together. So I would say that like I think that the government's definitely using outside sources to hack into our phones and our computers and whatnot. And I would say also that like that is not a very good thing, and we can't really know is a problem. We can only assume.
Okay, thank you.
When we discuss government surveillance for this panel, are we talking specifically government surveillance of U.S. Citizens, or are we talking about government surveillance outside of the U.S., outside of the populace? Or are we covering both?
Probably just U.S. is our focus, but I guess like in tangent to that, we can compare other countries and how we may line up, because like someone might be farther down the line in terms of their rights not being as respected. I think in the U.S. there's like a standard that we try and believe that we have. So I guess we focused on like how we are affected around the United States.
And so how surveillance may or may not infringe upon personal liberties and freedoms, is that? Is that accurate? Okay. Talk to me a little bit, Ms. Crosby mentioned this earlier, the Patriot Act. First of all, when did that start? Do you know?
It was passed 13 days after 9/11.
Okay. Kind of an important time to
Yeah,
look
very
at what
important
we're
time to
doing, how we're
start.
doing it, and what we could be doing differently. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so it would be safe to say with the Patriot Act that a lot of the government surveillance, as far as it goes to the general population, increased significantly after 9/11, correct?
Correct.
And that has continued to this time, it sounds like, because we're renewing this Patriot Act. Probably had some modifications along the way, right?
Yeah.
Course correction, certainly we've changed parties, we've changed government leaders, we've changed a lot of things since 9/11. You guys were born, those sorts of things. So, makes me feel really old. Talk to me a little bit about how government surveillance has ebbed and flowed over time.
So at the start of the Patriot Act, they kind of started it by wiretapping mainly only terror-related crimes, and
Okay.
then from there they.
That sounds like a good thing, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it started out as a very good thing, and then I think they kind of realized they couldn't just pinpoint like specific only terror crimes, so they started looking more heavily into all of its citizens. And there was a scandal, was it San Francisco with AT&T? So, put that somewhere. So this was also like later in 2001. Like primarily phone carriers would report back to the government, and they would share all of our phone services. They would share all of our information directly to the government, our texts, our phone calls, everything. And because of this, so many people were concerned. They were like, this is unconstitutional, it's infringing on our rights.
So cell phone carriers were sharing information with the government. And that
Yes.
was a new thing, or that was a newly discovered thing?
It was a newly discovered thing.
Okay, and they were doing it because they really liked the government, said, hey, I got some spare time, here's some of my data?
I'm not exactly sure how that came out. I had not, like, most of the articles I had found and read did not specifically say why or when.
Does anybody know why service providers were sharing information with the government?
I don't think so.
Just curious. I would guarantee it wasn't because they just decided it was a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, government surveillance of U.S. citizens, obviously a very sensitive topic, and we have constitutional rights that we have to protect. Can you explain a little bit, I sense obviously that the panel feels, or you all feel like that there's been overreach by the government, that they're surveilling too much of private citizens. Assuming for a second that there's a reason, there's some good reasons why people need to be able to do jobs to protect us and those kinds of things, where do you think the balance is? If you took a look at it from, say, where is the balance? Where did we, you mentioned right after 9/11, the Patriot Act, and going forward, and the continuing resolution that she educated us about yesterday, somewhere in the last 18 years or so, did we go too far, and where did we go too far, do you think? Did you find that in any of your reads, or did you form any opinions?
I feel like one huge overstep is that there's so much that can get monitored that it all kind of blends in to a certain point because there's so much information that comes through. Like, say everybody's phone is tapped, right? That's like so many calls and so many texts, so many videos, so many pieces of information that like are not all going to get monitored. So I kind of find that it loses focus on maybe the individual or certain maybe suspects or like people who might be threats could get like blended into like all
Instead
the
of it being
people are.
targeted, we have this mass amount of information, and people are getting caught up in what they shouldn't have been involved in.
And that's the huge problem with government surveillance, in my opinion. It's that like you take like a networking site that like me and like a terrorist would use, like a criminal and like a social justice worker, and it's really hard to see the difference between those because take like an academic student that has to do a research paper on like a terrorist kind of like organization, and then take a terrorist who is trying to get in contact with said terrorist organization. You'd see a lot of similarities, in my opinion, to like what they're looking up just on like a base level, and it's really hard and like to kind of weed out, I think, the good and the bad, especially when there's such a huge like database of information.
And so, as a follow-up for the gentleman with the athletic, or whatever, I feel like I'm in a press conference. So, with that, if you were charged with protecting the constituency, the people of the United States, and you were tasked and it said, Chase, what's the solution? Because there's a balance there, right? Because, yeah, you're exactly right. But what should be that balance? And is there things that you found that you think could be corrective actions that can kind of protect more individual liberty, but also allow well-meaning agencies who are trying to protect us to do their job? Do you have any, I know that's a pretty detailed question, I'm not trying to stump you,
I would say that government surveillance is all right when it's extremely monitored and it's extremely limited, and I think that it should only be enacted by like federal agencies like the FBI and the CIA and like those kinds of things, which it already is enacted by, but it's also enacted by like things that aren't as kind of relevant or high up there. Like a lot of people can just tap into surveillance cameras and do that, and a lot of people can use those same technologies that the government is using, and if they just purchase that. But I would say that like the FBI and the CIA should only ever even consider kind of tapping into someone's camera or data if they have like extensive evidence and if they have extensive kind of like a lead that they needed to follow to tap into that. I don't think they should just go on a whim if they think that that person is a suspect, because sure they might be, but sure they might not be, and then that person's right to privacy is kind of taken away, I think.
As you said, a lot of people can tap into a lot of things, and I'm curious who a lot of people are. Are you telling me that I can hack into people's video feeds from other places, or
Oh, sure.
their
It's easy.
Ring video cameras? Really?
I would say so, yeah.
I now have my eye on you, Chase. No.
Keep in mind, he oversees IT here, doesn't watch what you, don't make him angry.
We already
Should be
know what
recorded right
questions
now.
you guys are gonna ask, it's because we,
Yeah.
watch the video of you.
Yeah. Appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit more about wiretaps. My undergraduate degree is in telecommunications, and this was a big subject at the time, because wiretaps were kind of the primary way that the government or the intelligence agencies could glean data from you at that point, right? This is a little pre-social media, a lot of that email and the internet were kind of newly found ways to communicate en masse. So talk to me about wiretaps, talk to me about how that works. If I'm a government agency, if I'm a law enforcement agency and I want to get a wiretap, so that is tying into your phone calls. Chaz made a comment earlier about listening to every phone call, and I would submit to you that the government does not listen to every phone call. They may have the ability to listen to calls, but they do not listen to every call. Can you imagine the volume of calls that are going on right now? There's nobody sitting there listening to every phone call. However, there is a wiretap statute. It kind of goes into some of the FISA court stuff. Can you guys talk to me a little bit about wiretaps, how that works, how that has worked, how that works now? Specifically, that's the government listening into phone calls.
So with wiretapping, this is kind of a question from me to you. So can they
Please.
tap into a
Just
call?
turn the table on me. You're asking me questions. Go ahead.
Can they tap in while you're calling, or can they only tap in like after the call, or can they do both?
So wiretap literally means this is old school, they used to tap in, they put clips on the wires and would hear the same phone call. So if you've got an old school phone in your house and you've got one in 2 different rooms, you can pick up the phone, you can hear the same call, that's what they would do. They would literally listen into the call. It's a lot more high tech now with the new telecommunication systems, but that's what it means, is listening into the call in real time. So what do we know about wiretaps, ladies and gentlemen? Can the government just listen in to any, can they go, I wonder, Miss Crosby's gonna probably get a call today, let me just hear what she's talking about. Maybe she's talking to a friend, or Mr. Cat, I'm expecting he'll probably get a phone call tomorrow, let me listen to it. Can they just do that?
I would say they probably need a warrant to do that. Like, I don't know what reason they would have really to just tap into someone's phone call and just listen into an average conversation. But I feel like, and I think that has been seen in the past, that government wiretapping can be used for negatives, because like political parties always want the upper hand on each other. And with that, I'm sure in the past that they have listened in on each other's phone calls and gained information from each other and whatnot. And I'm sure that still happens today, because politics is a pretty ruthless game, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. I can't really know because, you know, I am not the government and I do not wiretap, but I would assume that that is what happens. I don't think they have a reason, though, to listen into a civilian's phone call, though. They haven't showed
You
me.
did mention warrants, so I wanted to get a little bit more on that. Does anybody else have any more information on wiretapping?
So, I don't know how connected this is, but the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, the purpose is to combat cyber threats by promoting information and sharing between private entities and government agencies. It also says that there's little control on what information is collected or how it's used. The flaws of the act pose serious privacy risks. So, while the line isn't clear, we can only assume that phone calls are a form of cybersecurity information, in that because there's little, it says that the information that is collected is not subject to open record laws. There's no way that we can know if our phones are monitored or not. That's like a huge part of cybersecurity. So I guess like my assumption would be that that might be included in that area.
So there's no way for us to know if they're being tapped or not. Do you really care?
I guess you could argue that, like there's bliss in the ignorance of it, like if you really don't know if you're getting monitored. But I guess that's a liberty that would be taken away. Yeah.
So you mentioned political campaigns. They just can't, they just can't listen in on each other. For example, like you're prepared to talk about FISA. What is your opinion about the 2016 presidential campaign and the use of FISA for them to be able to listen in and surveil private citizens working on a campaign to benefit the campaign? What's your opinion on the use of the FISA specifically as it relates to the last presidential cycle? Was it utilized appropriately?
So personally, I'm not as up to date about that, but I do think that it still would qualify as like kind of abusing a person's privacy, even if it is in a presidential election and for someone who will be kind of controlling our country for the next 4 years. So I do think that still could be qualified as abuse of a person's privacy.
And like she said, it like abuses their privacy, right to privacy, and the Fourth Amendment like protects us from against their unreasonable search, like from the government or other people. So I think that was just not like right, because someone, I guess, in politics and that kind of thing should know the Fourth Amendment and should know like the other person's rights to their privacy and not just to look and see what they're saying if they're talking about them.
Mrs. Crosby brings up a really, really great point. This is very poignant to our political environment right now. Talk to me a little bit about the FISA court. Why is the FISA court different from any other court? Why do we even have a FISA court? And I think if you can dig into that a little bit, you'll get right to the heart of what Mrs. Crosby was just asking.
Yes.
Who said it?
I guess the purpose of the court almost bypasses what, like it's almost like a workaround around like the Fourth Amendment and things that we normally would take as like a responsibility of like a certain right that we would have. It kind of bypasses what would be granted, like no question.
Okay, works around. What's the
Yeah.
purpose of the FISA court, Chaz?
I guess what I'm saying is that it's a way to, I don't want to assume, but from what I've read, it seems that a large purpose is to, it's enacted as a response to exposure during multiple committee hearings of previous abuses of the U.S.'s person's privacy rights by certain components of the national government. So it seems like because of some infringements that they found, they looked for a way to be able to monitor on a level that wasn't before possible.
So increased monitoring is one purpose of the FISA court. Does anybody else have any more detail on how the FISA court is different from any other court?
I don't
Not quite my wheelhouse, but let me